Hello and welcome to episode 232 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. I'm flying solo on the show again today because I wanted to talk about the state of the parks 5 years ago this month. We've covered the pandemic reopening in the past, but I think with half of a decade's separation, we can really look back and see how that time impacted the theme parks that we have today. I also want to talk about those closures in terms of my life and how they shaped this podcast and whether I wanted to stay in Florida. We're going to talk about all of it today. Before we get started, head to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel and make sure that you're subscribed. We continue to have more listeners check out every episode of the podcast on YouTube than are subscribed to the channel. That is not good. Let's make sure that everybody takes the time to subscribe. If you have a friend who loves Disney, Universal, or just really solid podcasts, suggest that they subscribe to us as well. We seem to have plateaued around 2,000 subscribers again, and we know that there are more of you than that. In the next few months, I'm going to be reaching out to people for different opportunities. If I can point to a big subscriber count, that will help us accomplish some of those things. That also goes for checking out our videos. On my birthday, I headed to Hershey Park, and it was a little bit of a disaster. It's a little silly to see one thing after another go wrong as I try to stretch the most out of my theme park day. Some days, it just isn't gonna happen, and you have to learn to roll with it. That video is coming up soon. Tomorrow, I'm going to be in New York City to see the Yankees at Yankee Stadium for the first time in my life. See what we accomplish in the Big Apple in a few weeks on the YouTube channel. In addition, there's still a ton of theme park content every month from Walt Disney World and Universal. You can see a trip to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and to a visit to Independence Hall in Philadelphia. I can promise you that I am working on some bigger things in the future. Make sure that you are checking out the YouTube channel. Now let's get started with a look at how the parks came back from the pandemic closures of 2020. I'm actually going to start almost 1 year before the closures to set up what was happening in the world and in my life when the pandemic arrived. My wife Courtney and I had dreamed of moving to Arizona for a few years. We finally made it happen a little after our 2-year wedding anniversary when she got a job in the Phoenix area, and I was able to continue working my broadcasting job from home. On my birthday in 2018, poor management cost me that broadcasting job. The company was falling apart and I paid for it because I was the one person my boss didn't have to look in the eyes. Courtney's job also started to have shakeups at the corporate level and we had to think on our feet. It was quick, but we found what was a more comfortable situation in Florida in April of 2019. That was just 6 months after I took Courtney to Orlando for her first full vacation to Walt Disney World, and the month after I took her for her first ever visit to Disneyland. I don't know if any of you have picked out an apartment without having the chance to visit it. It is a total crapshoot. You take something that you can afford and hope that it fits with your life. In the past, we've really lucked out in these situations, but this was not one of those times. This meant that our arrival in Florida was very unsettling. We had a 13-month lease, and we knew that we were going to be moving at the end of that lease. This meant that we lived out of boxes for our first year in Florida. The apartment was too small, and we were never really comfortable. There were 4 things that were keeping me sane at the time. We lived near our city's downtown, and I was able to take a walk of 2 hours or more every night. I could listen to books on my iPod, yes, I have an iPod, and chart a different path every night. I also spent a lot of time at the gym. I got an LA Fitness membership and I played a lot of basketball and tried to work through a running injury on the treadmill. A few months before moving, I also took a job as a travel agent with Ear to There Travel. This was such a lucky opportunity for me because I was going to be moving to Florida and I could really keep potential clients up to date on the Walt Disney World theme parks. What I didn't realize was the timing was actually horrible because the travel industry was going to be destroyed in a way that made 9/11 look like a tiny bump in the road. Of course, I also got an annual pass to Walt Disney World and tried to go to the parks at least once per week. The parks were also changing. When Courtney and I drove from Arizona to Florida with our cats Lily and Cassie in the back seat in their carriers, I remember listening to podcasts previewing Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, which was going to be opening later that year at Disneyland and Disney's Hollywood Studios. Toy Story Land had just opened, and the Great Movie Ride had already closed to make way for a ride based on Mickey Mouse. These changes got ramped up tenfold when Disney announced an avalanche of new ideas at the D23 Expo in August. Epcot was going to be completely transformed with a new festival center, a pavilion designed specifically to entertain the kids, a Guardians of the Galaxy ride, a Mary Poppins ride in the UK pavilion, a new 3D Circle Vision movie at the China pavilion, and Walt Disney statue, and so much more. That was just one park. Disney's California Adventure was going to get Avengers Campus. The 2019 D23 announcements were ambitious and showed a company that was confident in the recent acquisitions of Marvel and Lucasfilm. Every movie the company was releasing was a huge hit, at least financially. Mary Poppins Returns in 2018 was followed by the live-action Lion King and Aladdin. Frozen 2 and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker all came out in 2019. Disney Plus started giving us access to a library of new and old Disney content that seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Walt Disney World still offered free Magical Express from MCO to guests staying on property, free FastPass Plus to all guests, and the very popular Disney Dining Plan. By the early fall of 2019, I was starting to book a decent number of trips to Walt Disney World that were scheduled for early to mid-2020. By the time Christmas season arrived, I had found clients in multiple countries, and I had started a Disney podcast with two of my fellow travel agents at Ear to Their Travel. We ran into a bump in the road with the podcast that I'm actually going to be talking about next week, but I adapted and I launched the current version of the show in February with my new co-hosts Sarah Says and Maz. Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opened at Walt Disney World on August 29th of 2019, and Rise of the Resistance opened on December 5th with the introduction of a virtual queue, also known as a boarding group, through the My Disney Experience app. I will admit I was dumbfounded by Galaxy's Edge. I loved learning every little nugget about the land. Having not really been a big Star Wars fan for most of my life, the land also got me more into the movies. We were also getting television shows now, like The Mandalorian with Baby Yoda. All of a sudden, friends that I had from Pennsylvania were booking trips with me, and I was meeting them in Disney's Hollywood Studios at 4:30 in the morning so we could try to win the lottery for this brand new ride. Walt Disney World wasn't the only resort changing. Universal Orlando Resort announced a brand new theme park in Epic Universe. That announcement came in August of 2019, and the theme park would not be completed until I had already moved away from Florida. I had started a Twitter account to promote my business, and I was starting to get a ton of friends from there who wanted to meet me in the parks. One of my favorite theme park days ever was Christmas Eve of 2019. My new friend Ken from Detroit was staying down here, and we met up to ride Rise of the Resistance. The ride broke down while we were still in the queue, and Ray and Chewbacca literally were walking through the line with bananas and chocolate chip cookies to keep people from leaving. We finally rode it, had lunch, before Ken's wife needed to rest at the hotel. He helped her get to sleep, but then ran back to the park. The two of us goofed off at Hollywood Studios until early evening, and it was the absolute best time. In the meantime, while I was still trying to build my travel agent business, I had been offered a job that made a lot of promises, but it turned out to not be what I had thought when I accepted it. That ended up leading to an uncomfortable conversation when I left, and I was stuck with just my travel agent gig, which was slow. I only got paid after people took their trips. My day planner may have been filled with upcoming bookings, and I may have been busy scheduling their fast passes and dining reservations, but I wasn't getting a lot of those checks just yet. This started to turn around in the early part of 2020. In January, I started working for a Major League Baseball team's spring training facility. By March, I had already been offered a promotion with that baseball team, which will remain nameless, and I had some interviews scheduled for other incredible opportunities. Still, on the other side of the world, something was happening. Shanghai Disneyland closed on January 25th, followed by Hong Kong Disneyland the following day. Tokyo Disney Resort followed on February 29th, and it was starting to look like this thing was going to impact every section of the globe. Finally, March 13th, Disneyland in Anaheim closed, followed by every Disney park in the world by March 16th. Originally, Disneyland and Walt Disney World were set to be closed for about 2 weeks. Personally, I started hiking and learning. The University of South Florida put some free certificate courses online, so I decided to take them while I was at home doing nothing. I also used some free online codes for services that provided college courses and other types of courses. With the gyms closed, the only type of exercise I could do was hiking or just taking long walks. I would do this at night so that I wasn't seeing other people. I could play college courses on my iPhone while I put in 5 or 6 miles of walking per night. One course that I took was an Irish culture course that really set some things in motion for me. I started to really get interested in visiting Ireland and realizing that I had never taken advantage of the luxury of being able to travel around the world. I felt like I owed it to myself to get a plan for how I could get to Ireland. It was also at that point that I learned of a group called Modern Catholic Pilgrim. This group planned pilgrimages throughout the world for Catholics, but they were trying something unique due to the pandemic. They wanted people to plan safe, socially distant pilgrimages that they could do in their hometowns. I decided to do a 2-day hike or pilgrimage along the distance of the Pinellas Trail in Pinellas County, Florida. I walked roughly 20 miles on day 1, which brought me pretty close to my house where I slept for the night, and walked about 25 miles the second day. I ended at a Catholic church in St. Petersburg. Both of these things got me thinking about a pilgrimage in Ireland, which I eventually accomplished by walking the length of Ireland's National Famine Way in 2022. That plan really sprung from the first few weeks of lockdown in 2020. Something business-related also happened that played a huge part in my life. Phil Gramlich, our boss at Ear to There Travel, suggested a contest to keep all of us from getting rusty and losing our social media followings during the pandemic. The game came with points for posting pictures, points for how many posts, points for posting videos, and points for going live. We also got points for gaining more followers. The winner got a replica of the Matterhorn signed by Disney Imagineer Bob Gurr. I wanted to win more than anything. It was deflating to have so many fits and starts over the past 2 years. I also had the advantage of being one of the only travel agents in the company who lived within driving distance of the parks. As things slowly reopened, I made sure to be at Disney Springs the first day. The next week I was back for the opening of World of Disney. When Universal Orlando Resort reopened, I got an annual pass for Universal immediately. As I pushed out more and more content, not only did I win the contest, and my Matterhorn is on the bookshelf behind me as I record this, but I also gained a lot of followers. A small portion of those followers became really, really good friends. Even the people I found who were only close friends for a short time still meant the world to me. We needed more social media friends at the time. When I got a care package from Amanda in Scotland, for example, I needed that connection. It doesn't matter that she got busy and I haven't talked to her in a while. At the time, we needed people who were in the same situation. On May 20th of 2020, Disney Springs resumed business in a limited capacity as part of a phased reopening. Like I said, I was there at the opening, hoping to just feel a little sense of normalcy. Nobody, I assure you, took pandemic measures more seriously than I took them while I was out of my house. I still, to this day, will not ride in an elevator with somebody who's not in my immediate party. It was nice to walk around Springs and experience a little taste of civilization. As it turned out, it wasn't until later that night when I was already home when the real fun would occur. A family set up their own portable grill outside of Raglan Road and tried to make kosher hot dogs in the middle of Disney Springs. This was the type of absurdity to expect in 2020. The next week, not only did World of Disney and other Disney-run stores open at Disney Springs, but there was a press conference to announce the process which the parks were going to use to reopen to the public. It was announced that Universal Orlando Resort was going to open Universal Studios Florida and Universal's Islands of Adventure to the general public on June 5th. After the previous week had not been busy at Disney Springs, I was anticipating that it would be much of the same, but the Disney-run stores brought bigger crowds. My wife Courtney was with me in the car because we were celebrating her birthday and we were waiting in line to get into the parking garage at Springs. As we waited, we listened to the press conference and Walt Disney World announced it would be reopening in mid-July. That really hit me. This thing was supposed to go 2 weeks, and I understand that part of the problem was that Florida wasn't really shutting down in a proper way, which was allowing the pandemic to spread rapidly in the Sunshine State. Still, mid-July felt like a punch in the gut. Disney was trying to make every effort to have the Disney Springs experience feel more important. Star Wars stormtroopers were on top of buildings directing traffic and interacting with guests. There were Baby Yoda face masks for sale. The safety measures were also top-notch. Markers for social distancing could be found almost everywhere. There were stations to wash your hands. Hand sanitizer became almost ubiquitous. The world was also changing beyond just the pandemic. Protests were springing up throughout the country following the murder of a number of black people in the country by police, most notably George Floyd. If you were looking for a reminder that our little world of theme parks wasn't all that important, seeing those sights from the streets helped put things in perspective really quickly. The theme parks were, however, part of the real world. When the real world is shaken up, it will have an impact in the theme parks. In June of 2020, while the Walt Disney World parks were still closed, the company announced that Splash Mountain, based on the racially insensitive movie Song of the South, would receive a retheme to Tiana's Bayou Adventure. A movie that glorified slavery and Jim Crow was going to be scratched for the first black Disney princess. That was a big deal and one that I think had been in the works for a longer time than most people remember. I remember listening to other Disney podcasts before I even moved to Florida, and some of them had already been mentioning replacing Song of the South with Princess and the Frog. These weren't fan-run podcasts like this one. These were people who had connections with Disney, even if the company wouldn't want to admit that anymore. I wonder if Disney was flying test balloons on this as early as 2018. With the rising voices of the Black Lives Matter movement, it seemed like Disney could try to ride the coattails of social movement, add a newer intellectual property that is more marketable to families, and correct a major mistake of the Michael Eisner era at the same time. While I think Disney was planning on making this decision, the timing was certainly not a coincidence. There were a ton of projects that Disney knew were going to be put on hold due to the pandemic, so they had no real timeline for the retheme. They just knew they needed to do something, and they needed to make the announcement when they made it. In 30 years, when I'm an old man and my cousin's children are asking me about how polarized the political climate was post-2016, I don't know how believable the Save Splash Mountain accounts will seem. It's my sincere hope that grown men threatening black theme park influencers and even starting writing letter campaigns to the governor to try to keep a racist bunny on a theme park ride will seem so far-fetched that nobody will believe me. I don't hold out much hope based on current events, however. Still, it's important to look back at the division in the fan base that dates back to that very announcement. Looking back 5 years later, with Tiana's Bayou Adventure having been open for a little over a year now at Walt Disney World, I think this was really an important change for Magic Kingdom. People will tell you that Splash was their favorite ride in the park, and it was always the longest wait in the park, but that just wasn't true. It would have long lines, mostly on extremely hot days, but it was rarely ever at the wait of a ride like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train or even Space Mountain. Injecting a younger intellectual property has helped in other ways because I think younger kids are more likely to brave the 50-plus foot drop for a Disney princess they love more than weird characters from a Disney movie Disney doesn't even make available on Disney Plus. They also need a ride like Tiana's to draw crowds as an anchor in that part of the park, while Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is under a refurbishment. We'll see about speculation that this may lead to a New Orleans Square section of the park in the next few years. It's very possible with some of the other changes that have occurred. My first day as a Universal Orlando Resort annual pass holder came in mid-June. Universal offered some amazing deals, including adding 3 months to the end of your AP for absolutely free. My first ride had to be E.T. I will always consider this to be like the comfort food of rides. It just makes you feel good and is the type of ride that, in my opinion, separates theme parks from amusement parks. A classic dark ride that takes you through a story. In this case, it expands a little on the story that you know from the big screen. Before getting on every ride, a team member at Universal would squirt hand sanitizer into your hands, and Universal had the greasiest hand sanitizer I can remember using in my life. Still, I liked that they weren't leaving it up to the honesty of guests. They wanted to make sure that everyone was sanitized. The second attraction I experienced that day was Shrek 4D, and this is when I was introduced to the biggest problem Universal had during the pandemic. With so many screens and 3D glasses, masks would quickly fog up those glasses on almost every attraction. It was amazing how empty the parks were and how nothing had a line. I was able to just walk onto Hogwarts Express when it came time to go to Islands of Adventure. By the last day of June, I was once again at Universal, this time for my 40th birthday. My wife Courtney was an essential worker, and I thought it was stupid to ask for her to take off for my birthday when there was really nothing for her to do with me. With some of her health concerns, we weren't even sure if she was going to take advantage of Disney allowing people to cancel their annual passes. She certainly wasn't going to be going to Universal with me. Back in September of 2019, I had a falling out with one of the 2 men who served as best man at my wedding. He was in a toxic marriage and was taking it out on other people in our friend group. When he decided to attack the other guy to serve as the best man at my wedding, it was time to cut ties. He has since left that marriage, proving that I was right the whole time. However, it was still hard at the time and is still hard looking back on it. I was far away from all of my friends I had known in the past. I had just lost one of my absolute best friends, and I was celebrating a pretty big milestone of a birthday walking around Universal on a hot day in a mask. It was fun, and I can look back on it now with some humor. At the time, however, it was a little depressing. One thing Courtney and I were able to take advantage of was a deal at the Kennedy Space Center. The Kennedy Space Center was giving all paying guests those first few months a free pass to come back when the center was fully operational. We took advantage of that deal to do something that felt important around my birthday while also securing a pass for later. Courtney actually told me I could give hers to a cast member friend of ours named Jeff. Jeff has been on the podcast a few times and he loves NASA and space travel. I think it was really great that Jeff was able to go to Kennedy Space Center for free because of this deal that they had for the reopening. The real deals came when Walt Disney World was just about to start welcoming guests in mid-July. I had my newly needed Park Pass reservations for Magic Kingdom on the 4th day it was open, and Disney's Hollywood Studios for its opening day to the public. Well, I lucked into a 4-day trip because one of my fellow travel agents couldn't make it down to Florida. Travel restrictions were going to cost her any chance at a refund on her 3-day DVC trip scheduled at Saratoga Springs. She gifted me those nights at a steal of a price, and I was able to get Park Pass reservations for my entire stay at the resort. That meant that I could go to all 4 parks in a row: Tuesday at Magic Kingdom, Wednesday at Disney's Hollywood Studios, Thursday at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and wrapping it up on Friday at Epcot. The parks were on extremely limited schedules, and history may have forgotten that rates of people catching the disease were rising drastically at the same time. I was legitimately worried that we were heading for a second closure, so I wanted to make sure I was getting the most out of every possible minute in the parks. I got up before sunrise to drive from the St. Petersburg area to Magic Kingdom that first day. There were no trams, and park openings were staggered. When they finally let you park at the TTC, that's when we got to experience my favorite pandemic precaution. There was an empty parking space between every parked car. If you're 6'4" like me, you like the freedom that comes with not having a car next to you when you're trying to climb out of your Prius. Then it was time for a long walk to the security at the TTC. In addition to other safety measures, Disney took your temperature before you were allowed to proceed. This was actually nerve-wracking. Could you imagine setting up this entire trip, booking a hotel, and then finding out right before it started that you were a little too warm? Listen, I agree with the safety. I just know that there was always a lot of stress with that moment. Once I finally arrived at the front of Magic Kingdom, there were no waits to enter. They were just shuffling people into the park with all of the rides already operational and trying to make sure that they weren't clumping guests together as they arrived. Main Street USA was lined with cast members waving and welcoming us back to the parks. I immediately rushed back to Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which I rode 3 times in under 20 minutes. Guests were not only spread out 6 feet in the queues with tape on the ground, but there were temporary dividers in other parts of the queue. Once guests got onto a ride, like Big Thunder for example, it would be one party, then 2 empty booths, then another party. The wait times were so short, I wanted to head over to Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. I waited for about 15 minutes. 4 times an hour, announcements rang through the park to make sure people were keeping distant and that we were all wearing our face masks. FastPass Plus was gone, as it would turn out, forever. Disney was going to proceed with regular queues, and I think that was the perfect way for them to introduce paid skip the line. Regular guests were going to get really comfortable with 10 to 15 minute waits being the longest ones on property. Once guest levels continued to increase, it would get to the point that people would pay to have that experience all of the time. This was a change that was inevitable, but the pandemic gave Disney a way to ease guests into the process of accepting it. A lot of the things Disney did during the pandemic were forward-thinking. Character cavalcades replaced meet and greets and parades. Every few minutes, a group of characters would go through the park on a parade float. This wasn't enough to draw a huge crowd and get people clumping up in groups. It also gave people an excuse to spend more time on Main Street USA. These cavalcades would go through every couple of minutes. Merida riding her trusty horse Angus was my personal favorite. The fact that Merida was riding a real horse down Main Street USA was mind-blowing. These cavalcades stayed around for years. In fact, I think there may still be one in Magic Kingdom to this day. I do think that the pandemic gave Disney an excuse to stretch Festival of Fantasy way past its welcome point. With the parade taking a long break and then returning in a diminished capacity, I think Disney was reluctant to invest in a new parade. Festival of Fantasy was getting stale by the time I was moving. At 4:30 in the afternoon, I did a live stream from Magic Kingdom. I stood in the middle of Fantasyland and turned to do a complete 360 and show the entire land. There were only 3 people who got in my shot the entire time. I rode Big Thunder Mountain Railroad 5 times, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train 5 times, and really got the most of my time. Remember, I was worried that there would be an announcement any day that the parks might be reclosing again, and I wanted to make sure that I used my time wisely. As we left the park, Mickey and Minnie stood at the train station to wave at guests. It was bizarre being escorted out of Magic Kingdom when it was still bright out, but everybody was certainly understanding. The next day, the opening day of Disney's Hollywood Studios, was not as smooth. With fewer rides and virtual queues, DHS was a downright nightmare. Only one group could ride per car on Star Wars Rise of the Resistance. This drastically limited capacity. Only a few people got to ride the signature ride of the park every day. Even the other queues didn't seem to resemble Magic Kingdom. Hollywood Studios relies on shows to keep crowds lower. No shows were running at the time, which meant they weren't spreading out those crowds. There was nothing to do at Hollywood Studios that didn't take a long line. Worse than that, there was no park hopping at the beginning. If your reservation was for a park that was having a bad operations day, you were stuck there. I've told the story of that first week back a few times now, and I don't know how much my observations of Epcot and Disney's Animal Kingdom from that first week contribute to the overall narrative. I will say that one issue that reared its ugly head during the time without FastPass Plus was the judgments of people with disability access passes. With a few exceptions, if somebody was walking in what used to be the FastPass line, they had a DAS pass. This led to people in line judging every single person who was able to proceed through the shorter queue. This is when Disney Facebook groups started seeing a lot of people posting, quote, "They didn't look disabled." This might have been the worst change to come from the pandemic. Disney always went above and beyond to be accommodating. It's one of the things that I have always loved about the company. It wasn't just roller coasters. There were rides for everyone. They always tried to have vegetarian and vegan options. They promoted gay days, and chefs would take pride in finding ways to make dishes that would accommodate unique allergies. Those were all voluntary. They were above and beyond gestures. If Disney wanted to cut back on the amount of disability access passes they gave out to guests so that they could try to get those guests to pay for the accommodations that they need to make the parks manageable, the easiest way to do that is to get other guests to start turning on disabled guests. When you had famous Diz Twitter accounts that claimed to give you glimpses into the parks, run by middle-aged white men who are jealous of 8-year-old girls with spina bifida riding It's a Small World with a 5-minute wait instead of a 10-minute wait, and then they use that to rage bait online, you give Disney an excuse to cut the service. Remember, guests who use DasPass don't cut the line. They wait the exact same amount of time for the ride as someone standing in the queue, longer sometimes, but they don't have to wait that entire time in the queue. They can find a place that is accommodating to their particular disability. They can then return when they're strong enough to ride. This is the most blatant way that Disney took advantage of the climate of 2020 to do something nefarious. Combined stoked hatred of marginalized people with a sense that people are getting some sort of handout that disadvantages others, and you can get middle-aged Diz Twitter influencers cheering on a billion-dollar company to charge a family of five $15 per person per day for skip-the-line passes because one of their kids has a colostomy bag. All right, wow, I think that might be the best place to wrap up this episode. This has been episode 232 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Please make sure to subscribe at the YouTube channel. We'll be back next week when my co-host Sarah Says will join me to talk about Disneyland's opening day, July 17th, 1955, and the ways they are celebrating the 70th anniversary of Walt's original park. That will be next Thursday. Until then, have a great day.